room. If I haven't, I'm Brad, and it's great to be at Alleluia again this year. I live right down the road in Bastrop, but there is another conference that happens every year during this same week up in Wisconsin, up in Green Lake, Wisconsin, and it's the Fellowship of American Baptist Musicians. And I have been up there presenting for the last 4 years running, every year. Hal Leonard has been sending me up there, so I haven't had a chance, although I'm right down the road. I haven't been able to get to this conference, so I'm really glad this year to be able to be here. This session is dealing with the theory and kind of giving you a little bit of a methodology, if you don't already have one, for how you do two things. Number one, how you add fun notes to chords to kind of doctor them up a little bit. But then number two, how you take chord progressions, which you find in a hymn book, you know, or any kind of lead sheet that you might be working from, and how you doctor them up a little bit to make them just a little bit more interesting. Now, I'm going to have to say this before I jump into it. I realize that some folks in here probably have a pretty significant theory background. And as I talk through some of these things, you're going to be able to track with me and understand exactly what I'm saying. I also realize, though, on the other end of the spectrum, it's entirely possible, and probably is true, that some folks in here have no theory background whatsoever. And it's always difficult when you have a 1 hour, session like this to try to figure out material that is going to keep folks that have a lot of theory in their past, interested, and yet not leave and overwhelm folks that really don't have that musical background. So I apologize if I'm going to cover a lot. I'm going to cover everything on the page, and it's going to get a little heavy into theory. And if that is something that overwhelms you a little bit because you might not have had that in your background, or maybe it's been a few years ago that you took theory classes in college, I apologize for that. I told my class this morning, and I'm going to tell you too, there is a great theory book. I always recommend it. The Hannibals, Vicki, you guys have heard me now in 4 or 5 sessions. Always recommend this book. I don't know what the textbook is that they use here at Baylor. When I was a student, the theory textbook that I slept through with my classes was a book called Tonal Harmony. And isn't that funny? I really did. I'm not kidding. I was a performance major, and I thought, my gosh, when am I ever going to need this stuff? And I just promptly went right to sleep. And of course, that's, the Lord's kind of joke on me, because I spend my life writing and arranging and editing and, proofing, and I use this stuff every day. I taught theory for a while in college at a Christian college up in Kansas, and when I was there, they had been using, I think, Tonal Harmony, which is a great book as well, but I found this book and gave it a shot, and I fell in love with it. It's called Music in Theory and Practice. Music in Theory and Practice. It comes in 2 volumes. It's by a guy named Bruce Benward, B-E-N-W-A-R-D. It comes in 2 volumes. Both volumes are fantastic. The second volume is a little bit beyond really what you're going to need in arranging. It's kind of an analysis of styles from music history. What makes Romantic era pieces romantic? What makes classical era pieces classical? The nuts and bolts, most of everything that you would need to do this kind of stuff, is found in that first volume. So I don't care if you have 25 theory books at home. If you don't have this one, you really do need to buy it. I have never, it's a collegiate book. It's not, music theory for dummies with a dancing panda on the front that tells you this is a quarter note. It's a serious book, but I've never seen a book that explains theoretical concepts so clear. When I teach part writing, I always teach from that book, and it's really nice. All right, we're going to bust through this, and we're going to do it really quick here. And this, I just want to point this out while I'm about to start teaching here, this is exactly why you don't want to let your teenager have your phone. I don't know if you can see that. She did that for me right before I left. So that's just a real, She's 15, or 14. She's going to be 15 this year. So she's absolutely determined she's coming to Baylor. She loves Baylor. And so I've been taking pictures every day of all the great root beer floats that I've been having because she's really jealous of that. And I love making my kids uncomfortable and jealous. But I'm good dad of the year. So anyway. Let's jump through this, and I'm going to go through, you've just heard the introduction, so we've already knocked out 1 out of 3. I'm going to go through number 2 really quick in about 5 minutes, and then we're going to spend what's going to seem like forever on number 3. And that's where we'll spend the rest of our time. How many folks in here do have a little bit of a theory background? Well, they let anyone into this conference nowadays. They let anyone in here nowadays. Oh my God, get out of here. Go.
We're going to go and eat the Whataburger.
Go. Oh no, don't go to Whataburger. Lord, I'm a Whataburger fanatic. No one's from Chicago here.
Yes, we are, Brad. The new home of Whataburger.
We hope we get one because of that.
Whataburger sold to Chicago. You guys know that.
It's Chicago. What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go wrong? Anyway, let's rather than talk through that, which could easily take up our time, let's jump into this. All right. Well, most of us have a theory background in here, and that is good news. Here's the deal: the triad chain. Okay, if all of you know what a major scale is, and this is your Theory 101 5-minute review. You need to at least be comfortable with me this far. If all of you know what a scale is, and I just played all white keys, C major scale, up and down, okay? We name each one of those scale degrees. The first tone is 1, and it goes right up to 7, and if you hit 8, you've got the C, again, just up an octave. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? We're good that far, and then you don't get to 8, you start over at 1 again. All right, well, if I were to build chords, in other words, if I were to, maybe I can just kind of wheel this really jump with, so I'm not going to, I won't be able to angle it where everyone can see it. But it's all right, I'll tell folks what I'm doing. I'm doing, basically with each one of these scale degrees, if I just stack chords on top of it, 3-note chords, right? Then I come up with what we call in music theory all of the diatonic chords in C major. And diatonic means those are all chords that are found within the scale of C major. Now the fun chords, well, they're fun chords, but the really colorful chords happen when we're playing in C major, and we find chords to use or tones to use that are not one of those 7 tones or the 7 chords built off of them. Okay? So, since this is the 1 degree of the scale in the key of C, when we build a chord on top of it, what do we call the chord? The 1 chord. Yeah, that's right. Okay, and then here's the 2 chord, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're back to 1. It's easy to demonstrate that in the key of C major because it's all white keys and it's easy to visually see that, but I could do it in D flat, right? I mean, it's the same sequence of tones. I could do it in D. It's the same sequence of tones that you would transpose to any key. Okay, we call that the triad chain. All right, now, next thing about the triad chain is not all chords within the triad chain are created equal, okay? Some are major chords, what we call major chords. Some are minor chords. And there's one chord that's a diminished chord. We call it a diminished chord. Okay, and that's all found within the triad chain. Now, let's talk a little bit about what makes each one of these chords what. And by the way, in case you want to know, I'm going to tell you in a minute which ones are major and minor and diminished if you don't already know. Everyone know what a half step is? Okay, a half step is just 1 note to the very next note, up or down, right? I'm going up there, but I could be going down. Most of the time on the piano, it's a white key going to a black key going to a white key. If you can visualize the piano for a minute, you know that there's 2 spots, E going to F, and then B going to C, where it's a white key moving to a white key. But that's a half step. And so if that's a half step, you know what a whole step is. It's 2 half steps. Okay, very good. So, knowing that, then the formula for how you figure out major chords, and I know this is probably old news for most of you. I'm pushing us through it. A major chord is, think of it this way, it's what we call a major third with a minor third stacked on top. What in the world is a major third? A major third is 4 half steps. Okay, if I had chalk in here, I guess there is some chalk over there that I could write, but I'm not going to do it right now. From C to C sharp is 1 half step, C sharp to D is a 2nd half step, to D sharp or E flat is a 3rd half step, and then E is your 4th half step. So 4 half steps makes a major third. C to E is major third. E to G is a minor third, right? That's 3 half steps. E to F is a 1, F to F sharp is the 2nd one, then F sharp to G is your 3rd one. So major third stacked on top of a minor third makes a major chord, okay? What's a minor chord? It's the exact opposite of it. It's a minor third stuck on with a major third stuck on top of it. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I take that major chord and I flat the middle note, so I turn it from C major to C minor, well, that's a C minor chord because I have a minor third, 3 half steps, and a major third, 4 half steps. Okay, stuck on top of one another. A diminished chord is 2 minor thirds stuck on top of one another. Okay, I teach this stuff a little bit different, right, than what other people might. So if I think of what a minor third is above C, that takes me to E flat, think in your mind 3 half steps. And then from E flat, 3 half steps higher, takes you to G flat. Okay, so a minor third stuck on top of a minor third makes a diminished chord. Okay? There's one other chord quality that we have to deal with, which we find a lot, and that is an augmented chord. Okay, now you can think an augmented chord is a major chord with a raised fifth, or however you want to think of it. I think of an augmented chord as 2 major thirds stuck on top of one another. Right, so C to E is a major third, 4 half steps. And then if I go 4 half steps or a major third above that E, that takes me to G sharp. Okay, and then there's my augmented chord. Does that make sense? It is theoretically more correct to think of these things in terms of their scale degrees. A major chord is the 1, 3, and the 5, and a minor chord is the 1 and the flat 3 and the 5. But I find that not everyone understands all that theory yet. And so when they're trying to figure out what these chords are, if they can at least think in terms of what half steps are, then they can figure out the formulas for building these chords. So a major chord is a major third and a minor third on top. A minor chord is the opposite of that. It's a minor third with a major third on top. A diminished chord is 2 minor thirds on top. And then an augmented chord is a major third with a major third on top. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, very good. So look at what we've done, gang. We've covered all the way A through G, and we did it really quick. The other thing that we can handle and talk about is this idea of a 7th chord. When I played my little triad chain here, I was just playing, we call it a triad chain. That word you might not know, that means 3, right? Like a tricycle, got 3 little wheels on it. That's a 3-note chord, okay? If I stack another note in thirds on top of it, then I get my series of 7 chords, right? And then I could do exactly the same thing. And we have ways of labeling those 7th chords, which actually we don't need to go into today, because I'm going to give you enough food for thought just dealing with the triads. Lastly, inversions, okay? You will be surprised how much mileage you can get when we really start talking about doing some fun things with chords in a minute. You'll be surprised how much mileage you can get by actually keeping the same chords you've always used, but inverting them. Okay, folks, think of everything has to be in root position, root position, root position. For instance, one of the most beautiful chords in the world is a major chord in first inversion, and then you add a 2nd in there. If you don't believe me, ask Morton Larson. He uses it all the time. It's just, and so does contemporary Christian music, right? You can't really have a Christian song unless it's a major chord with a 2nd put in. Otherwise, it just ain't Bible. And so you find really that you can get a lot of mileage out of really relatively simple things. Okay, that's what inversion is. If you don't know what I mean by that, again, it's covered in this theory book, but it's the idea of this is a C major chord, and when C is on the bottom, we say it's in what position? You guys are awesome, because the root of the chord is on the bottom. Okay. okay? If you take that C and you move it to the top, it's the same 3 tones, but now then I have E on the bottom, then G, and then C. In classical terms, we say that this is in first inversion, okay? And then we can invert that one more time by taking the G, which is currently on the bottom, moving it to the top, and I have G, C, and E, and then that second inversion. Do we have a third inversion? We do if there are 7th chords involved, but if we have a 3-note chord like this triad, if I move the G up to the top one more time, that gets me back to root position. It's just up an octave higher. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? All right, very, very good. How many folks feel really, really comfortable with your chord knowledge? I mean, if I were to say, okay, you know, Todd, I'm looking at your name there. You know, give me an F sharp diminished, and you could say F sharp AC. You know, really, really, really quick. How many folks can do that reasonably well? Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to tell you the best way to get comfortable with this stuff. If you can get as far, now this is why we're all going to thank the Lord for finale, because my notation is hard. Do you know I've got a phobia about turning around backwards where everyone can see my bald head? And I'll tell you where it came from. It came from my wife. My wife knows exactly what to do to help me to always feel good about myself. And, a couple of years ago, I was doing a piano concert at a college in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Is that how you say it? Okay. There's a college there. I forget what it is. No, it wasn't Tahlequah. It was somewhere in Oklahoma. Let's move on. I was doing it anyway. I was playing. This has been quite a few years ago. Back when I still played classical music, I really, unfortunately, don't do that a whole lot anymore. I don't really play at all. But I was doing my Mozart, my Haydn, and I had a bigger performance coming up. I was taking it to a competition on this program. And so I really wanted to hear it. That way I could kind of, critique it and make some notes on what could be improved. So Patty, my wife, is sitting in the balcony, and this is a beautiful auditorium, and they've got a wonderful styling. And there's beautiful flower arrangements everywhere, and she's videoing this, and I get home, and the concert goes well. We get back to the hotel room, and I can't wait to look at the video. And for an hour and 45 minutes, one intermission, 2 halves, about an hour and 30-minute concert. She has that camera on the tripod locked on my head, which is in the middle of this spotlight. And all I can watch, I hear the music, which sounds pretty good, but for an hour and 30 minutes, I just see this head bobbing. And ever since then, I just can't do it. Anyway, what I want you guys to do, if you would, and this is a great exercise for you, is to find enough theory material where you can start to write out a scale. What I've written out is the C major scale, okay? And we've got a formula for how we write out scales if you don't know it already. This is a whole step in between the first 2 tones, and then another whole step, and then from E to F is a half step, and then a whole step, then a whole step, then a whole step, and then a half, okay? And then from that point on, you just stack tones on top of them in what we call thirds, right? If a note is on a line, I stack on the line above and the line above. If it's on a space, I do it on the 2 spaces above. So what I was playing for you a minute ago, this is what I was playing. This is the triad chain, okay? I also told you that I would tell you which one of these chords are major and which ones are minor. We call the 1 and the 4 and the 5 chord are major chords. Those are the ones that if you did that little analysis of, how you stack them, you would find that these have a major third on the bottom and a minor third on top. So 1, 4, and 5 are the major chords in the triad chain. We also call these the primary chords. Okay, primary because they're used most often. If you know these 3 chords in every key, you really can go a long way toward playing things by ear because songs use these 3 chords so often. The rest of these not primary chords we call the secondary chords. Okay? And here they are. There's my 2, there's my 3, there's my 6, there's my 7, and then of course I'm back to the 1. Now do you see that I'm writing these chords a little bit different? I'm writing the uppercase chords, uppercase Roman numerals. That's how we show major chords. If it's lowercase Roman numeral, that's how we show minor chords. If there's a circle out beside it, that's how we show diminished. I think most of you are probably on board with that. This sounds ridiculous, but if you can get you a manuscript paper book and write this triad chain key out in every key, all 12 of the major keys, you'll be amazed at how these chords will start to lock in for you. And you'll really understand them really, really well. You can go to the piano and learn to play the triad key. Even if you're not necessarily a pianist, you can go to the piano and learn to play the triad chain in all keys, and that is really helpful too. All right, good. It's 4:20, so we've got 40 minutes now to go to the meat of this. Chord substitutions and color tones. Here's how we do it. Let's take on the back of your sheet. I have an arrangement of "There Is a Fountain." Okay, it's a wide, and I should have picked a different hymn this morning because when I was doing piano arranging, I kind of gravitated toward this one, and I forgot that this is what I put on the back of the sheet. It's a watered down version of an arrangement I have of "There Is a Fountain" in Sketches in Ivory. It's just, in fact, really not the same arrangement, really at all. But we're going to use this to kind of teach us a few things. When you're wanting to figure out some chord substitutions, the very first thing that I put is back to the triad chain. Okay, let's talk about what that means. If you take a look up there at the triad chain, and I'm glad I wrote this because this is, you need to be able to visualize this maybe a little bit more than you could do in your head. Any chord that's up there is going to have at least one other chord that shares two tones in common with it. Okay? So for instance, let's look at the C major chord, which is chord number 1. Can you find for me any other chords up there that contain at least two of the same tones? Okay, 3 is 1, that's correct. Are there any others? 6. Okay. So, here's a little something for you. When you're looking for ways to reharmonize something, if you have a 1 chord, you might be able to swap that out with a 3 or a 6. Or if you have a 3 chord, you might be able to swap that out with a 6 or a 1. Or a 6 chord might be able to swap out with a 1 or a 3. You get how that works, okay? And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. Okay, what about that 2 chord? Are there any chords there, and there are, which contain at least 2 chords in common with that 2 chord, which is a D minor chord? The 4 and the diminished. That's right. So you've got 2 in major 4 and diminished 7 oftentimes are interchangeable. And then finally you'll find that the 3 and the 5 and the 1 are going to contain some of the same chords. Okay, some of the same tones. So, for instance, let's take a look at "There Is a Fountain." If I were to open up the hymn book and play this, "There Is a Fountain" usually is in B flat, this one's in C. But if I were to open up the hymn book and play this, what am I going to find? I'm going to find a C major chord all the way through there. I might find a little old-fashioned, you might find that. But basically it's going to be a C major chord all the way through until you get to the second bar. And then it's back to a 1. And then it's going to stay on C major. And then it's going to go to a 5 chord. Okay, does that make sense? Well, right away, I want to give a little bit more interest to this than what I can do necessarily just by staying on C major for the whole bar. So when we get to the halfway point of the bar, beat 3, I'm thinking there might be another chord tone another chord we could use. And so rather than staying on 1, I went down to the 6, because remember 1 and 6 are interchangeable, right? They contain at least 2 of the same chords. Now, what that sounds like unembellished is this, right? And already that is a little bit different, right, than what's in the hymn book, okay? Now, I can do something more to that, which I'll talk about in just a minute, which is add in a few fun little tones, and then all of a sudden I get, right, and that starts to sound more sophisticated, okay? All I've done done is just swap out the 1 with the 6, okay, and then added in a couple of little tones there for spice. Does that make sense? You look at the 3rd bar, and it's supposed to go back to C again, right? Well, I've already used my A minor in substituting for C, so the other chord up there that can substitute for C is Mr. 3, which is E minor. So here I go back to C, and then here's E minor. Right, and that's a different sound. And there's my A minor again. Right, so far I've found ways of reharmonizing There Is a Fountain, and I really haven't gone beyond just chords that are found in the C major scale. Right, does that make sense? Okay, so you want to get very conversant with these chords and all the keys. And that's something that I had going into college a little bit of an advantage with because I was a jazz player in high school. And my jazz teacher, he was a wonderful guy, wonderful teacher, but he would make me take these old standards like, All of Me or something like that. And I'd have to play those suckers in every key. And improvise in them, and I can still do that now. I can go through the hymn book and just move it. I don't have perfect pitch at all, but because of that experience with him transposing, take the A train, when it comes to transposing What a Friend We Have in Jesus, it's just usually not as hard. But you really can get there by thinking through this and practicing through it. It really does come. All right, that's the first thing. I know I'm rushing through it, but I'm just wanting to kind of get all this done. My next point is one-tone mini chords. One-tone mini chords. You can really have a lot of fun with this one, okay? And it can take you into some weird places. If I call out the tone G, if I call out a G, you folks that are theory-minded, throw back at me a few chords that would harmonize with G, a few chords that would sound good with a G.
E flat.
Tell me again?
An E flat chord.
E flat. Okay, in E flat major, the G would be the 3rd of the chord. That would work out fine. Give me another one.
E minor.
E minor, it would be the minor 3rd of a chord. Okay.
C minor.
C minor, it would be the 5th. It'd be the 5th of C major as well. G. We haven't talked about a G yet. A G would be the root of a G chord. Okay? Well, it also can be a lot of other cool things. Okay? It can be the 7th of an A minor chord. It could be the major 7th of an A flat major chord. Right? It could be, here's a fun one. Now this is where you got to think on it a little bit, but it could be something that we call the sharp 9 of an E chord. Now think about what that is. And I know if you're not a theory, if you don't have this in your head right now, it's going to leave you behind a little bit. But let me talk to my theory geeks right now. That if you think about what an E major scale is, the 2nd scale degree is an F sharp. Okay, we also call that the 2 or the 9. Okay, if I were to sharp that F sharp 1 degree, it would take it to G, and that would be my sharp 9. Well, what makes that interesting is that if you think about what the 3rd is of an E major chord, it's G sharp. So I've got a G sharp and a G in the same chord. Well, not like that, but if I put it into the context of a cool voicing, then all of a sudden it works really well. So that G could be the sharp 9 of an E chord, okay? It could be the flat 9 of an F sharp 7 chord. So my point is there's so many different ways to harmonize one tone. So this could take you all day, and you probably want to go in a room where your spouse can't hear you. But if you want to learn to do this, you go into a room, grab a hymn book, and just start having fun with every tone and seeing how you harmonize it. And some things you're going to come up with that you really do like a lot, and other things you're going to come up with that when people hear it, it's going to put them in therapy. But, with this little bit of There Is a Fountain, all right, what about this? I'm using the G there as a a 9 as a 2 on an F major chord. You know, that's kind of a cool sound, right? I mean, it would be really kind of weird to go and make it, you know, kind of the... Although you could, I mean, I could kind of see that working, and then, you know, you kind of decorate that up there. You get the concept with that, right? And it's experimentation is what it is. You just say, okay, I'm going to take this note of this melody right here at this point in the phrase, and I know in my mind I kind of want to have a different color chord there. I'm not really sure what it is, so I'm just going to go on a treasure hunt and see how many different ways I can harmonize that chord, that tone, with different chords that I can think of. And some are going to sound awful, and some you'll come up with some really pretty cool things. Now the neat thing about this is, I told you I don't have perfect pitch, and I do not. I wish I did. But when you start doing this for a while, you actually, something comes alive in your brain, and you actually start to be able to imagine these sounds. And you know, when I'm sitting there, before I played that F major chord, in my head I could kind of tell what it was going to sound like. So it's ear training, as well as good theory training, as well as kind of teaching you, you know, how to go about hunting for some really, really cool sounds. So that's what I mean when I say one tone, many triads. Now you don't want to do that with every tone of your melody. What if we harmonize there as a fountain as, you know, you can't do that. I look for just different important notes in the melody and think, that would be a nice moment. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from. Maybe that would be a place where I would kind of experiment a little bit with, you know, finding some different things there. 2-5-1 progression. Okay, let's go back up here to the triad chain one more time. How many folks have ever heard of a 2-5-1 progression? So we got maybe a few little jazzers in here. 2-5-1 progression is your bread and butter if you're a jazz musician. You learn your 2-5-1 progression in every key. You learn to improvise on it. And the reason why is because it's found in so many jazz tunes and so many songs that musicians like to improvise over from the Great American Songbook. Okay? A 2-5-1 progression is simply the 2 chord, which in the key of C, which we have up there, is the D minor chord, going to the 5 chord, which in this particular key is G, and then going to the 1 chord, which is C. Okay? And again, just like I can move that triad chain into all 12 keys, I can move my 2-5-1 progression into all 12 keys. Okay? I threw out Take the A Train a minute ago. You probably know this song. I don't know if you know the chords to it. I'll play it in the key of C. So I'll show you where the 2-5-1s are. Here comes one. It's a D minor chord. Going to G. Going to C. Now here's D minor, G, C. Then I'm back. Here it is, D minor, G. Sorry, can't play it. Not look at the piano. There's one right there that gets me to the key of F, which is where I am right here. G, and then I'm back to C, right? So it's all over the place, right? And we can really learn a cool harmonization lesson from 2-5-1 progressions, okay? Let's look at, I found a good one this morning in piano arranging, and I'm going to remember it. I was messing around with What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and I found one that I really liked. If you think about What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and you go to the hymn book, it's in the key of F, that's my F chord. And then where's it going? Right here, it's going to the B flat chord, which is the 4 chord. Okay, right? We all know that. All right, now think with me for a minute in the key of F, and you theory folks, this is going to be a good exercise for you. In the key of F, the 1 chord is F, the 4 chord is B flat, the 5 chord is C. Okay? Now this is where I'm going to stretch you a little bit. I know I'm going from that F chord to a B flat chord, right? Ba da 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 dee da, B flat chord. what's the 2-5-1 progression in the key of B flat? Now we're in the key of F, but I'm now asking you what is the 2-5-1 progression in the key of B flat. So you've got to put your B flat cap on now. C, F, and B flat. But is it just any C? It's actually C minor, right? The 2 chord in a major key is always a minor chord. Okay, so it's C minor going to F, going to B flat. So I wonder if, and I can because I figured it out this morning, if you can approach the 4 chord with its 2-5-1 progression. And it creates the coolest sound. So instead of, which is nice, but instead of that, what about this? Right, or I could jazz it up a little bit more and put it into a cool voicing. Right? All I did there, I'm going to a B flat chord, I just, rather than staying on F, I just approached it with a C minor chord, and then an F chord, and then the B flat chord. And then that kind of opened up a new world there, right? Now, where I'm finding as I go on with this is that in the hymn book, we know that it would be F, and then it would go to B flat, and it's just going to camp on B flat for 2 bars. Let's not do that. Let's replace B flat. Now see, it's so fun because I'm in the key of B flat, or in F, but I'm thinking in B flat now. The 6th chord of B flat is G minor, and we know that 1s and 6s can be interchanged. So what if we go, and then instead of staying there, we went there, right? And I turned it into a minor 6 chord.
So we take a tone of a note and we figure out some cool chords.
Yeah.
And my question is, which is what you've just done, but I still don't know how you know where to go. Is, okay, I found this chord I want to use. Now where do I go from here?
Yeah, right.
You know.
A lot of that, you know, music, really about all kind of music follows certain rules in its
Right.
chord progressions, okay?
Where do we? That's in the theory book.
That's in the theory book, but I'll tell you what, we move the bass, this isn't always true, but roots of chords tend to move by fourths, okay, which is the circle of fourths, if you remember that from music classes. The circle of fourths, it will move by seconds. Basses often will move up by seconds, or they'll move down by thirds. And there's a lot that falls into that, you know, and so if you get stuck and you're not sure, I found a cool chord, but I don't know where to go from there, a lot of times if you experiment with either up a fourth or down a fifth, it's the same thing, or up a second, or down a major or a minor third, you know, oftentimes that'll kind of help get you out of trouble. A lot of problems can be solved that way. So what you could do, and I mean for me, this just, you know, sounds like the best day ever. You know, for you, it, or some people, it, you know, just might, you know, seem like, well, not the best day ever. But I would take a hymn from a hymn book. I was trying to think of something clever there was. It just evaded me, so I just did a parallelism. Yeah, I haven't had coffee hardly at all today. Anyway, is to take a hymn from a hymn book and just sit there and figure out all the different places you can put a 2-5-1 in. And some places are going to work out great. Other places it's not going to work very well for you. But that's okay. That's what you learn from experimenting with it. You know, and there really is no right or wrong answer to it. You know, I mean, I think of Amazing Grace, right? It's in the key of G major. And then I'm going to go to a 4 chord there. And the 4 chord is C. So that's D minor, G minor. I don't know if it'll work or not. Kind of stretched it out a little bit there to make it work. But you just have fun, you know, experimenting and seeing where you can put these things in, these 2-5-1 chord progressions. I wonder if I have any on the back. Surely I do. I do. Look at bar 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Well, okay, so when we get to There Is a Fountain, we've already talked about the hymn book version. It's just going to be C, and then it's going to go to F, and then it's going to go back to C, and then it stays on C, and then it goes to a G chord. Okay, well, that's it. Well, so we know that where I've gotten so far in the arrangement is going to the 1 chord, then going down to the 6, and then I hit the F, and then back to the 1, and then I've got E minor to A minor, and then instead of going to G, I'm going to the 2 chord, and then I'm hitting the 5 chord. Right? It's a really simple trick, but it adds a little bit of color there to it. So there's an example where I see the 2-5-1 chord progression at work, and there's probably other places in here too where they're at work. And you just, as I'll say again, you just have to spend a lot of time kind of experimenting until you find what you're looking for. Number 4, chord progressions. Okay, I've already mentioned to you that you can get so much mileage out of using a simple inversion. Okay, I see one spot where I used an inversion in the 2nd line, 2nd measure. Okay, the measure right after where we stopped. So at the beginning of the 2nd line, I've got my D chord, D minor chord, and then I'm going to a G chord. Well, again, hymn book wise, we would just go to C and we would camp there for the whole bar. Okay? Well, when I get to that 3rd beat, I have an option of going down to the A minor chord, which I've already done. I could have went to the E minor chord, which I already did. I did that at the last measure of the 1st line. So instead, I just move it up to an inversion, and it sounds great. It gives this idea. Here it is. You hear how that changes the color a little bit? Or maybe you might want to add a 2 in there, a D. Right, that changes it again. And kind of, oh wow, that sounds so fresh. It's just a C major chord with a different bass note in the bottom, right? I do have some other inversions in here, but I'm using them in a little bit of a different thing. I'm looking at the bottom line, and I'm using them as part of a different technique. So I'll talk about those in just a minute. Go through and take a hymn book and take a hymn, and I guess if I gave you a methodology for this, it would be to put this sheet up there right next to your hymn book and go through and try to do number 1 and just see how many different chords from the chord chain you can substitute. And then after that, go and try number 2 with your hymn. And then try number 3. Don't try to incorporate all these techniques in at the same time. You just can't do it. It's no one can do it. Joe Martin can probably do it. But most of us mortals can't do it. And so what I would do is say, okay, I'm going to look at number 4, chord inversions. Here's the hymn, To God Be the Glory. I'm going to play through it once, get it in my hands, and now I'm going to see what kind of interesting things I can come up with just changing the inversion of the chords. And then after I get tired of doing that, then okay, I'm going to go back through To God Be the Glory, and I'm going to see where I can maybe figure out what some 2-5-1 progressions are, and that's all I'm going to work on. Right? Does that make sense? So you attack this one thing at a time. You don't try to do it all at once. I'm a big believer in number 5, chords derived from bass lines. I sometimes will sit at the piano when I'm trying to work out an arrangement, or if I hear something, if I'm noodling underneath a prayer in a service, something might catch my ear. I'm a little leery to do it then, because if I start experimenting too much, I'll get myself in a fix and things are going to sound bad. But when I'm at home and I'm kind of noodling around, I'll often kind of, just hear a bass line to go with the melody. And sometimes it's not always the bass line that I'm familiar with. For instance, when I was creating this little mock-up here of There Is a Fountain, my ear gravitated toward a certain bass line, and I didn't even know what the chords were going to be, but here's the bass line I heard. Look at the third line, and look at the 3rd bar. Okay, so the last measure of the 3rd line. This is where we get into the refrain of There Is a Fountain. Okay, so we've got, well, here's what I heard. Okay, I heard the melody and I heard a bass line that did this. a little bit different. What it should be is just, right? Well, I don't know if I heard it or if I just experimented with it till I found it. It's been a while ago that I created this. Well, okay, that's really cool. I've got this bass line. So now then the task at hand is to figure out a chord for each one of those tones that kind of reconciles the melody on top and the bass line. So in other words, what's a chord that I can find that is going to harmonize well with the melody and the bass line? And I remember when I messed around with this, it took me a couple of minutes to figure it out. Back when I first started doing this, it would have taken me a couple of hours to figure it out. But the more you do it, the more adept you get at it. What I finally came up with is this. These are the chords that I was hearing. So I'm coming into it from... So here it is. Right? That's a nice sound there. Right? Does that make sense? And so I guess you can go through, and a theoretician could go through and tell me exactly how each one of those chords are functioning, as we call it in theory class. But all I know is I just heard a cool bass line and figure out some chords to go with it. Right? Does that make sense? The other place in this little mock-up here that I heard a bass line that it took me a minute to capture, this one was a bit easier, but it's in the last line, okay? If I just play the melody out of the hymn book, you know it. Right, that's out of the hymn book. Well, what I put with it was, look at the bass line. Right? So how do I figure out how to harmonize those chords? And this is what I came up with. And you know, today I'm hearing something different. Here's what I wish I would have done. I wish I would have carried that bass line down a little differently. I would do C, and then B flat, and then A, and then A flat. That's where it wants to go. Brad made a mistake there. I should have done that. And then go on with where it is. Okay?
Is that the money?
That's your money, Kyle. There you go. That's right. That's right. So, I really can't give you any kind of technique of how you do this other than doing the same thing which I did and we've all done, which is just block out some time and sit and experiment with it, you know? And just like the other techniques that I've given you, just say, okay, I'm going to open up to Living for Jesus, which is one of my favorite hymns, or, you know, whatever, Softly and Tenderly, whatever you want to open it up to. And say, okay, I know what the bass line is, but I'm going to just see if I can figure out a little melody that maybe the bass line can have against what the right-hand real melody is doing. And then if I find something I like, is there any way I can create a chord which sounds good in the middle between them? And then you might come up with a really, really different, fresh harmonization, right? That I doubt I would ever come up with those kind of chords had I not imagined or messed around till I found the bass line there to go with it. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm going through this so quick, and I'm just trying to throw out some tools here for you to take with you. And I'm trying to leave a little bit of room here for any questions at the end. When we get into adding color tones, okay, in jazz we call them color tones. I'm not sure if that's a universal word for this. I can't remember what theory books call them extensions, I think. I don't know. But there really are, again, no hard and fast rules for what tones to add. It really depends a lot on your taste, and hopefully you have good taste. You know, what's that old line I forget what it is, but taste is like, let's not go there because I can't remember it. But it was pointed off to, you know, some people have good taste, others don't. But what I have done for you is included the typical tones that go with each one of the varieties of chords, okay? And usually, when you're assuming we're working at the piano, when you put in these color tones or these extensions, you usually don't put them down low in how you're voicing. Usually you're going to put them up somewhere high because, you know, a second crunches a little bit when it's up high, but it really crunches a lot when it's down low, okay? And so I'm sure it has something to do with the overtone series, but be that as it may, a lot of these tones we usually voice a little bit higher. And when you start experimenting with these tones, you really do start to realize that they each kind of have their own personality, okay? If I have a plain Jane major chord, if I add a second to that, then this is what it sounds like. You hear how that tone has been added in there. If I add a 6, here's a major chord again, just to get that back in your ear. If I add a 6 to it, that kind of takes on an old-timey Glenn Miller big band sound, okay? You mean from that? Yes, from that. Think about this sound. Right, I mean, it's kind of that Chattanooga choo-choo, you know, kind of in the mood. You know, that's the major chord with a 6th added. Major 7th chords, which would be this. You can add a 9th to it. You can add the sharp 11, which kind of adds that otherworldly sound. We didn't talk about the sharp 4 with a major chord, but that's a big one. If you can't have the sharp 4 with a major chord, we can't have John Williams. Because, you know, you just can't, you know, I mean, that his big fanfare kind of music just really, really relies on that. One quick thing that some people have had questions on before when I've taught this, if I'm in the key of C and I'm saying add a sharp 4, you know, I kind of bust through this assuming most people know where I am with this. Think of your C major scale, and the 4th scale degree is an F. So if I say add the sharp 4, I'm meaning add an F sharp, okay? Well, when I get down to number 2, where I say major 7th chords, I'm saying add an 11. Okay, well, an 11, if you think here with me, it really is the same thing as the 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we know we're going to have to start over again, so this would be 8, 9, 10, 11. So why am I calling it the 4 one time and the 11 the next time? It's not higher. It has to do as if there's a 7th there or not, okay? If there is no 7th involved, then when I add a D, I'm calling it a 2nd. Okay, when I add a 4, I'm calling it a 4. When I add a 6, I'm calling it a 6. If the chord has a 7 in it, then we have to call all these added tones by their extended name. So this 4 now becomes an 11. This 2 becomes a 9. You remember a minute ago I was talking about the sharp 9 chord. The 6th becomes the 13th, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right? So rather we call the 2 a 9, or the 4 an 11, or the 6th the 13th, it has to do with whether or not there's a 7th present, okay? All right. You'll see as we go through the color tones list there that the one chord quality that really can take the most color is the dominant 7th chord. Okay, now we haven't really talked about that. I suspect most of us know what it is. But the dominant 7th chord is, the dominant is a fancy word for 5. Okay, and so you look at that 5 chord up there in the key of C, which is G and B and D. And if I were to stack another 3rd on top of that and make that a 7th chord, I would add that top line F, okay? And once I do that, that turns into my dominant 7th chord. That dominant 7th chord can take a 9, which would be A. It can take a flat 9, which would be A flat. Right, we've all heard that sound before. It could take a sharp 9, which would be A sharp or B flat. Yes, B flat against the B natural. Remember, but if you harmonize it right, it can work really well. It can take a sharp 11, which, again, if I'm thinking in the key of, I'm in the key of C. This is where people fall into trouble. I'm in the key of C, but when I add a sharp 11, I'm not adding an F sharp, which is the 4 in the key of C. Although I'm in the key of C, the chord I'm dealing with is a G chord. And so I've got to figure out, okay, what would the sharp 11 be for G? And it would be a C sharp, yeah, that's right. And so if I add a C sharp there, it kind of creates that sound. Or if I add a 13 with it, that kind of gets me back to that big band sound. Flat 13 really is a cool sound too. They each have these, they each have their little personality, right, that you kind of get to know. Now on the back of There Is a Fountain, you see where I've used a couple of these different things. The only tones that I've added have been things that would follow the rules that I give. And this is, baseline entry level stuff. And so if you're listening to it as I play it and think, well, that's not very creative, well, just remember, I'm starting kind of easier here. Beethoven didn't write the Ninth Symphony first. And so you kind of have to have a starting place. There's one chord on here that's wrong. And I'll tell you where it is. It's the second line. I've done this presentation a ton, and I always think, the next time I do it, I'm going to correct the sheet. And sure enough, when I was driving up from Bastrop 2 days ago, I realized, well, I forgot to correct it again. But it's the last chord on the second line. I'm calling that a D9 chord with a sharp 11. In other words, a D7 chord with a 9 added and a sharp 11. But that be not a sharp 11. If I were thinking in the key of D, the sharp 11 would be a G sharp. And what's sharp there is the A sharp. Okay, so that chord is not correct. That's what it really is just an augmented 7th chord. Okay. Anyway, so you can see the tones that I've added. I won't improvise or play anything other than what's written. Not reinventing the wheel. The concepts are really, really simple in that. I had the great fortune, I told my arranging folks this morning that like a lot of the clinicians that are here this year, my degrees are in music, but not composition. I didn't take a composition class. I took the obligatory theory class that I had to, and then I wanted to get out and play whatever I wanted to play on the piano. And so, but God really kind of remedied a lot of that because He's sent me some incredible mentors like Joe and others. And one of them that a guy I really worked with a lot is Mark Hayes. And I used to live in Kansas, and that's where the school was where I taught. Mark was right down the road in Kansas City. And of all of us, the guy that, if you've ever played a Mark Hayes piano arrangement, you just have to think, where does this guy come up with this stuff? It is creativity at its most excellent level. And I asked him one time, Mark, how do you come up with this? And he said, I don't know, just go buy some of my piano books and copy them. and you know what? That's what I did. I took him on his word for that, and I bought all his Well-Tempered Clavier series, and I would sit there and copy and figure it out. And I also hasten to say this, that when I first started doing this is a little bit of a repeat of what I said this morning, but creativity is a spur-of-the-moment wonderful thing. It's not an academic thing. It's not something you can put a lab coat on and sit and kind of dissect and figure it out. Nowadays, when I'm sitting and I'm improvising at the piano, it just kind of comes out, more or less. Sometimes it comes out and I wish it would have stayed in, but I'm able to kind of come up with this stuff and hear it, but it really wasn't always like that. And I remember when I first started, I would look at a hymn out of a hymn book, and I would stare at it for a few minutes and try to figure out something to do, and I would just say, I got nothing. I can't think beyond what's on the page. But the more I, kind of experimented and read through what Mark was doing, and the more I kind of, took some of the things I learned from my jazz, then I was able to kind of make that really be a starting point, and I could kind of hear things. And the more you do it, it's like a muscle. Creativity is a muscle, and the more you use it, the better, the stronger it gets. And so, if this has been a little bit overwhelming, some of these things, I guarantee you we've all been there. And what you want to do is just sit down and bite off 1, 2 things at the most, and just see how you can work that into your hymn playing, Same thing with these color tones. Just say, okay, I'm going to find where all the major chords, all the minor chords, all that. And then once I've found those, then I'm just going to spend an hour. It'll be a very relaxing hour for you. And just say, okay, here's Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior. What can I do, what chords, without even changing the chord progression, what tones can I put in? And do they sound better if I put them low, or do they sound better up close to the melody? Just experiment and be gentle with yourself. If you've not done a lot of this before, be forgiving with yourself if you don't, sound like Joe Martin right away. But start, incorporating that, and you'll be amazed at how your ear comes alive, and you really do start to hear this stuff a little bit better.